Welcome, everyone. My name is Nikki Johnston, and I'm with Transition Advisors. Our webinar today is Tax Season Implications for M&A of Accounting Firms. Before we begin, we need to cover just a few important items. First, please close any other programs that you have running on your computer. This will help to ensure quality presentation and reduce any audio issues. Transition Advisors is a proud and approved sponsor on the National Registry of CPA Sponsors per NASBA. In order for you to receive your 1 CPE credit for today's webinar, you must complete 2 requirements. The first is that you participate in 3 out of the 4 polling questions that we'll have throughout the presentation today. And please note that GoToWebinar does monitor your participation in these polls. Next, you'll also need to complete an online evaluation. And if you registered for today's webinar directly through Transition Advisors, you'll receive a link to that evaluation in an email from me after the webinar today. Once you've met both of those requirements, I'll email you your CPE certificate within 10 business days. Now, on the next slide, Joel, in order to fully participate in the webinar, please familiarize yourself with the GoToWebinar control panel. You'll see that on the right-hand side of the screen. There's an orange arrow near the top. You can use that to minimize the control panel if you wish. And during the presentation today, all of the participants are muted, but if you'd like to communicate with us, you can type in a question in the chat box at the bottom and just click send. Questions are important to us, and time permitting, Joel will answer all of your questions throughout the presentation today. If not, we can certainly answer them by email afterwards. Now, as a reminder, you did receive a link to download a copy of today's slides in the reminder email. But if you don't have that handy, I just sent it again via the chat function. So you can click on that and follow along. I'll also email a PDF of the slides after the presentation if you'd like. Now, before I turn it over to Joel, I'd like to launch the first polling question for today. The first question should be on your screen now, and it is, how many partners are in your firm? So we'll keep it open just for about 20 seconds, give everyone a chance to tell us a little bit about who's on the call today. Okay, looks like nearly everyone has cast their vote. I'll go ahead and close the poll. And the results are there on the screen. Joel, 78% of the folks on the call have 1 to 2 partners in the firm. 11% are in that 21 plus range. And then 5%, 9 to 20, and the remaining 6%, 3 to 8. Okay, so all that said, I'd like to introduce our presenter for today. Joel Sinkin is the president of Transition Advisors. I thank you all for attending, and I hope you enjoy the webinar.
Thank you very much, Nikki, and hello and welcome to everybody. I appreciate knowing how busy the season starts to get at this point in time, everybody who's joined us today. We have a diverse group from small firms to large firms, but statistically it kind of matches up with the way that the metrics of size firms work. We have 45,000 member firms as members of the AICPA. And when you think about it, you have your top 100, which brings you to about 35 million. Then you have the G400, the next category, which kind of brings you down to around that $9 million range. And then you have the other 44,500 firms. So it's natural that we have more 1 to 2 partner firms. Today's session, we're going to talk about some of the tax season implications that involve and impact mergers, acquisitions, succession plans, things of that nature. We'll start by giving you an amazingly brief background on us. This is not supposed to be an infomercial. It's a CPE class. But I do think it's important to have an idea of the speakers and their perspective. For the last 25, shortly to be 26 years, the only thing we've done are help accounting firms buy, sell, and merge with each other. We've been involved in well over 700 closings of accounting firms during these times, ranging from some of the largest deals in the country to sole practitioners. Most of the deals we are involved in relate to either a growth strategy, either for both firms or one firm, or a succession strategy. So that's what we're going to be speaking about today. Really is based on when you've been doing something for as long as we have, you see a lot of mistakes, you make a lot of mistakes, you try not to make the same mistake twice. So fortunately, you're speaking to us in 2016, not 1990 when we started. More info commercial, let's go on. Just a quick view that these are the main players at our firm. We're basically in most of the states in the country. So enough of that. Let's get into the session itself. Whenever I teach a class, though, I try and make sure everybody comes out into this with 20/20 vision. And that's being, if there's 50 things we need to know about handling any type of merger, acquisition, succession plan, the smartest person in the room is usually only going to think of 35. And today, I have to say to you, we're not going to get you to 50. We'll get you into the deep 40s. But the reason for that is the tremendous uniqueness of each practice. I could show you 4 firms with the same amount of revenue, the same amount of partners, and there may be nothing else the same about the firm. But there are certain parameters that operate that you want to try and stay within and hope that good communication and common sense will handle those couple things that come out in almost every transaction. You know, we're going to spend a lot of time on this next topic. I'm going to bore you with one page staring at the screen. But so much of what we're going to talk about today revolves around 2 subjects. That is, how do you value an accounting firm in a sale, especially a sale to an external buyer? And why do you have your clients? Because these 2 things are the main aspects that are impacted by tax season. Let's start by trying to get a better understanding of how one goes about valuing an accounting firm. We tend to look at 5 main variables, and how these variables interact with each other is how we come to a conclusion of value. Unfortunately, and when we teach the class, which we'll be teaching at least 2, maybe 3 this year through our company, as well as several for the AICPA and other organizations, when I teach the class, that's totally only about how to value an accounting firm. Today we're going to get a brief part of that. Most people come in there with 3 questions. The first one's, what's the multiple? The second one, what's the multiple? And the third one's, what's the multiple? What I want you to think about right now is that the multiple is the effect. Let's focus on the cause. So there are 5 variables we're going to discuss briefly. The first one is cash up front, if any. I have to tell you, there's a wide range of cash up front that you'll see in a deal. The range, for the most part, is generally speaking 0 to 20%. And bad news for some of my sellers, there's way more at 0 than at 20%. So cash up front, it's very rare that you'll see someone write a check for a substantial amount of the purchase price at closing. Now, there have been exceptions, and it's amazing. Just in the last 2 weeks, I've spoken with several firms. One firm is actually talking about putting a third down. Very rare. On a fairly large deal. It's a G400 firm, about $20 million, looking at a $2 million firm, and they're actually talking about putting down that much money. Conversely, I have a similar size, both buyer and seller, or mergee and mergor, who not only is the larger firm saying they won't put cash down, but they're expecting to have a 5-year payout period on the accounts receivable and work in process. They said, I'm taking over a $3 million practice. There's $2 million worth of overhead. We're not just going to come up with that day one. We recognize it's their money, the AR and WIP, but we need the use of it. And that's why I say there's a huge range. But most of the time, it's between 0 and 20%. If I was to say the most frequent I'll see, it's 10%. But cash up front has a lot of other things that impact it. And we're going to talk about some of those in a moment. The second variable is the duration of the retention period. What we refer to when we speak of a retention period in the sale of an accounting firm is we talk about how many years after the deal is closed, if the fees will go up or down or clients are lost, how long, if at all, will that impact the seller or the purchase price? So generally speaking, what's kind of interesting that to a lot of people, a tendency that you might see is the larger the firm, sometimes the shorter the retention period. The reason for that is a lot of times a larger firm has some brand loyal relationships. Most of you 1 to 4 partner firms, and many of you firms that are 5 partners and up, have really basically partner loyal clients. Partner loyal clients take longer to transition and have a greater risk than a brand loyal client. So how long is that retention period? I will tell you it's a very rare time that you'll see a deal sold, a practice sold where there's no retention period. As I've said, I've been involved in over 700 of them. And other than internal sales where partners are buying out partners, I have never been involved in a deal that there was no retention period. Most of the deals are either 1, 2, or what we call an earnout or collection deal, where the entire payout period is predicated on collections. So for example, if it was a 1-year retention period, whatever the buyer does in the first year locks the purchase price against the agreed upon multiple. A 2-year retention period can be done many different ways. It could be an average of the first 2 years. It could be what we do in year 2. Most of the time, when I'm drafting an agreement on a 2-year retention period, it's done a little differently. What we'll usually do is we'll wait till month 27 or 28, and then we'll look back and say, what did we collect of repetitive business of the client still active as of month 24 from the billing period of months 13 through 24. So to me, if it's a 2-year retention period, the client should survive for both years. So we'll look at what did we actually collect in the second year's billing period from retained clients at such time of repetitive business. It's very important to differentiate between special project work and repetitive business. The reason for that is if I'm paying you a multiple of, let's just say 1 time for argument's sake, and in the second year I have a client come up to me with a very unique special project that's never going to be done again, and it's a $50,000 special project. If I do that special project, I'm going to owe the seller all $50,000. I'm going to lose money on that deal. So I encourage most people to separate special projects, have them paid purely on a basis of collections. So if it was 1 time and a 5-year payout, for example, I'd pay the seller 20% of that special project, but I would not count it towards a multiple. Conversely, I'd say 80% of the deals I've been involved with, for the smaller firms especially, have been collection deals. So if I'm getting 1.2 over 6 years, then the buyer's paying the seller 20% of gross collections for 6 years. What's very counterintuitive is what of those 3 scenarios, 1-year retention period, 2-year, which could be 3 or 4, but we're using 2 years, or the whole payout period is based on retention, which of them are the best case scenario for the buyer, and which of them are the best case scenario for the seller? We've actually been very involved in a study looking at 90-plus deals that we've done over a couple years ago and looking at the results of them. What was shocking to us is the worst deal for the seller turned out to be the 1-year retention deal. So here was the seller saying, I want to mitigate my risk factor. I want to lock the purchase price as soon as possible to protect myself, and it backfired on them. The reasons that we've seen that is, number one of the problems with selling an accounting firm is you're selling it to an accounting firm. Trained skeptics. People look at something and say, what's wrong with it, not what's right with it. So many people anticipate if it's a 1-year guarantee, Moses in month 13 separating the Red Sea and taking all the clients away. So what do? The buyer offers a lower valuation, and they tend to shake the tree real hard during that first year. I don't want to lose a client in month 15 I could have lost in month 5. So the buyer ends up paying a lower multiple, locked in at the lowest point in time of the practice. One of the best deals for the buyer turned out to be the 2-year retention period. The theory is, if I do the work, if you sold me your practice today, and I do the work in 2016, and the clients come back in 2017, hey, they've seen the change, they're not unhappy about it, and they came back. The truest measure of client retention is year 2. And what's more likely if I've kept them for both years? Losing those clients in years 3, 4, and 5, or fee increases and special projects? So what the buyer frequently does is they stop the seller from participating as the wheel is about to spin on higher, and we're starting to grow that practice better, and locking them at a secure point in time. Now, the exception to that's the 10,000-pound gorilla client. We have a deal right now in our Texas office of a small firm doing about $1.5 million. They have 2 clients that make up $400,000. Those clients you have to keep on a retention basis. You can't take the risk of losing them in year 2.5 and still paying the full value for them. Conversely, the best deal for the seller, as counterintuitive as it was the collection deal. The reason was when the seller shared the risk and took on so much of the risk, buyers were willing to pay a higher valuation, a higher premium, a higher multiple. They were more patient in the transition. They didn't shake the tree, and the seller participated in those fee increases in special projects. And they should, because it's very challenging to negotiate a deal with a seller and say, hey, I lose this client, I don't pay for it anymore, but if this client increases, you're not going to get that either. A good deal is a fair deal. They should participate on both sides. So the first variable, cash up front, if any. Second one, duration of the retention period. The third one challenges people sometimes. It's profitability. And the reason I say it challenges people is because many times, based on our training, when we're valuing a practice, we're valuing it based on the profitability of that practice. But what I value it on, partially, is the profitability to the successor firm. Let me give you an example of why I say that. Let's say I had a small $400,000 practice. 5 years ago, I was operating out of my home. Kathy, my wife, answered the phone. My net was what, 80%? Then we were tired of people knocking on our door. I took an office. Kath didn't come with me. I was fortunate enough to get Gretchen to come and help me. And now, all of a sudden, my net's 45%. At which point in time was my practice worth more to you? See, it's irrelevant to you as the buyer. If you could absorb my practice with little to no incremental increases in overhead, it's a very profitable transaction. If conversely, I say to you, you got to keep my space. You got to keep my office manager. Yes, she makes $80,000 a year and has 16 weeks paid vacation, but she's been with me for 30 years. And you've got to do this, and that mitigates my profit. So when I'm talking about profit, I'm talking about profitability of the deal. And remember, that includes tax ramifications. Be careful what you ask for. If you're a seller and you insist on goodwill, and you're not having a 15-year payout period, but the buyer's got a 15-year time he's got to deduct it or she's got to deduct it, you've got to know they're going to reduce the offer by those tax consequences. So that's all part of the variable number 3, the profitability of the deal. Variable number 4 is a simple one. It's how long is the payout period? Most of my small firm deals from, let's say, $300,000 to $1.5 million or so, most of those payout periods are 4 to 6 years, with the highest amount 5 and 6. When you're talking about larger deals, most of those payout periods are 8 to 10 years, with most of them being 10 years. Now, I've done the first 4 variables. I come to the multiple, because the multiple is the effect. Think of it very simply. The less money up front, the longer the retention period, the longer the payout period, the more profitably the deal is structured, the higher the valuation, and the opposite. So let's take an example that cements this a little bit. Let's say I had a $200,000 practice, just to use an extremely small example, and everybody on the phone's a buyer, and all of you could absorb it with no incremental increases in overhead. If I said, pay me 15% of collections for the next 10 years, with no cash down, structured as a consulting agreement, would you do it? I know I would. Heck, if I raised the fee 7.5% in years 1 and 2, I paid for the whole acquisition. I know that's 1.5 times, but if I lost a client after 5 years, I collected 500% and I owed 0.75. It's a grand slam. Now, some of you on the phone might say, well, Joel, you're not thinking about present value. That's why I do it. You're right. I'm not thinking about present value. Number one, I hate present value. I've always struggled with it. I get it, but I don't get it. But here's the reason why it doesn't matter. If I'm paying you, that includes fee increases and special projects, that could be greater than any interest factor. So therefore, present value doesn't apply. Now, if I said that same seller wanted to get paid out in 5 years with a 2-year retention period and 10% up front, depending on where you are in this country, you're looking at 0.9 to 1.25. That same seller said, I want to get paid out in 3 years with a 1-year retention period, 20% down, and goodwill. I doubt I could get them one time anywhere. If that same seller said, I want all cash at closing, I wouldn't do that deal for 60 cents on the dollar. So here's one practice I'd run away from at 0.6, and I'd run to the altar to do the deal at 1.5. It's cash flow and profitability. But now we're going to do a second polling question to make sure you get CPE, and then we're going to talk about how tax season impacts these variables. Why don't we do that next polling question?
Okay, the next polling question is on your screen. This one is, which best describes your personal situation over the next 5 years? And you see there that your options are that you're seeking to reduce your time commitment. Some of the partners are reducing while others are seeking growth. You're not interested in acquiring or merging in a firm, or you don't envision being involved in the M&A deals. And just keep in mind you do have to answer 3 out of the 4 in order to get your CPE credit today. This is our second polling question of the day. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, share the results there. Looks like 42% selected that last option about not envisioning being involved in any deals, while another 30% say that they're seeking to reduce their time commitment. And then 22% say that they're interested in acquiring or merging in a firm.
Okay, so we've got about 60% that this is going to make a lot of sense for, and 40% they're bored to death listening to my New York nasally sound, but hopefully they'll get some value out of it anyway. So let's now look at how tax season can impact some of these variables. The first thing let's look at is cash up front. Where this could have a huge impact when you're valuing a firm is the time of year you're closing your deal. See, if I have a $600,000 practice or a $6 million practice, and I bill out 70% of my revenues by April 15th, then it's very likely, if I'm selling before tax season, I'm in a position to get a stronger down payment. If I'm not going to have the deal effective till June 1st, most of the buyers will sit there and say, hey, you've already sucked the profit out of that firm. I could be months and months before I'm in really great cash flow. I've seen deals where people actually operated at a negative cash flow because a practice was so tax season oriented. So what happens is, very often, a deal closing in June could have no money up front, and a deal closing in January will typically have a high percentage of money up front. 10 to 20% would not be unusual. Because if I'm going to close on that practice and in the next 12 weeks get all my money back plus, it's a sweet deal. If I'm going to close in June, not only am I unlikely to want to come up with cash up front, I might even ask you for the use of your Aon whip to get me to the next tax season, because you're at least a percentage of it or a payout period on some of it. For example, we closed a deal in the West Coast a week or two ago that won't be effective till June 1st. And as of June 1st, 50% of the money that comes in from the Aon whip, we're going to have to pay back in the second and third year, and 50% the seller will get right away, because we have to take the practice over in June, cover all of the expenses, and we're going to need some cash to make that happen. So cash up front and the treatment of accounts receivable and work in process can be very heavily influenced by the time of year you're closing, if what the practice you're closing on is a tax season oriented practice. The next thing it has a big impact on is the duration of a retention period. This is based on the following concepts. Number one, how many clients do I only see during tax season? You know, when I first started in 1990, most of the firms I dealt with, the partners went out to see their clients every month or quarter. Heck, I had a lot of them that did the work. When they got to the clients, they wrote their check, the client signed it, and they left. But welcome to 2016. If you're not on the cloud, you're going to be, or should be. And so many of our clients are sending us information via email, fax, through the cloud, staff's picking up the work. Accounting Today had a survey that I believe it was Accounting Today, that 87% of accounting firm clients are only in the same room with the partner in charge of them once a year. That once a year, generally speaking, is tax season. If I lose a tax season and I don't close my deal before it, I can lose an entire year for part of the transition. So it's a very important part of us looking at what duration of the retention period is going to be, because I need at least 2 tax seasons if I'm a buyer to feel confident that I've really retained these clients. Now, this goes back again to why do you have your clients in order for us to go forward from this point in the session. Most of your clients, 98 to 99% of everybody on this phone, their client base, the truth of the matter is, has no idea if you're a competent or incompetent accounting firm. If they knew that much to measure your technical skills, surely they'd do the work themselves and not pay you to do it, unless, of course, there's an audit involved that they can't do for themselves. So the majority of your clients, even in big firms, don't really have a yardstick to measure your skill set. So why do you have your clients? It's because of you. If they love your fees, raise them. They should be able to live with your fees, but they're comfortable with you personally. Yes, location, fee structure, the amount of your services, but this is a personal relationship business. And at the end of the day, you have your clients because of the partners, for the most part, that have generated them. So tax season impacts when we have to say to ourselves, when should we start to plan our succession and our merger? And the reason for that is tax season is the one time of year we're going to see every client in our base. So whenever someone's thinking about succession, the first question I ask them isn't how many more years they want to work full time. It's how many more years they want to, it is how many more years they want to work full time. It's not how many more years before they retire. Most people just don't retire. They slow down gradually. Maybe in 2017, I want to work 4 days a week. In 2018, 3 days, and then retire. So the question that we need to ask each other is how many more tax seasons before I want to slow down? Not how many years. And the reason for that is 3 years is really only 3 visits. It's hard to transition someone through the phone, email, and the cloud. The best way to transition them is face-to-face. So we need tax season to implement some of these transitional things. Now, if you have a lot of face time with clients and you get to see them every month or quarter, obviously it take you less time to transition those clients than if you're only seeing them once a year. So this impacts what? This impacts client retention, which is the most important measure of success of any merger or acquisition. I mean, if I retain all the clients and the revenue's there, the seller's going to get paid the maximum value, the buyer's going to make the maximum profit. That's what we're hoping for in a deal. So utilizing tax season to conduct a transition is a critical part of what we need to do. Now, there are other things that impact when I start the process. You know, for example, I have a lease coming up. Believe it or not, that's a time to think about succession. I can't tell you how many times I'll get a call. We got one just last week from a firm down in the D.C. area. Hey, Joel, I'd like to start looking into an upstream merger. 3 of us want to slow down. 5 of us are young and want to keep growing, but they don't have the capacity and skill set to replace all 3 of us at the same time. And then he went on to say, and I've got beautiful, well-appointed space, great parking, great location, a great rent factor, and I just got 10 more years I hooked onto my lease. So I said to the gentleman, I said to him, how big is your firm? He said, we're $6 million. I said, let me ask you a question. How big do you think your successor firm should be? He said, probably 15 million or larger. I said, don't you think they have an office? See, so many people forget that most deals want the mergee to move into the merger, the seller to move into the buyer's office. That's where you create the greatest synergies. That's where you can create the better cross-selling opportunities by having the niches all around each other. There are so many advantages. Now, that's not to say people don't do deals with satellite offices. Many of the deals, over 40% of the top 100 are clients of ours. A significant percentage of the G400 are clients of ours. And many times they'll do marketplace deals where they're not in a location and they want to be. And if the firm that they're targeting is large enough, yes, sometimes they'll keep that location. But most of you on the phone are smaller firms. And if I'm already in Bethesda, Maryland, and you're in the same town, and I could absorb your practice into my infrastructure, it makes it so much more profitable for me. I could pay you more and make more. So what happens when you insist on keeping a location, you generally lose 70% or more of the potential buyers, and many of the potential buyers or successor firms, if it's a merger, will reduce the offer they would have made to you by the cost of these increases that happen by having two offices instead of synergies that happen by having one. And things are going to get worse. Remember, the baby boomers statistics are undeniable. Over the next 5 years to 7 years, we're going to have the greatest exodus of talent in the history of the profession at a time we're struggling to develop the staff to step in and replace them. You know, you're talking about two of the greatest issues in accounting today, succession and staffing, and they're heavily related. Because if young, positive, great staff were everywhere, we would have succession potential and we wouldn't have a succession issue. But the greatest commodity in accounting today is young talent. If I had a dime for every time one of us in my company gets a call from a firm that's saying, hey, I'm looking for a young entrepreneurial person to bring into my firm to groom to be my successor, I wouldn't have bought a lottery ticket this past week. And by the way, that's not a succession plan. I'm going to find young talent and bring them in. That's a pipe dream, right? And so things are getting worse. So starting your transition, starting your upstream merger now is important because each year it changes. Values have come down greatly. Value of most accounting firms in 2015 was considerably less than 2010, which was considerably less than 2005. Heck, in 1990 and in the early 90s, I saw 1.5 to 2 times on most transactions. You almost never see anything over, let's say, 1.25 these days, and I see a lot under 1. So it's going to get worse, which asks the question, is it a buyer or seller's marketplace? Let's address that before we keep going. If you're a small firm, let's say under $1.5 million, if you're Manhattan, under 2, 3 million, even 4, and you're in a densely populated part of the country, it's still very much a seller's marketplace. When someone says, I've got $1 million of repetitive business and I'm ready to give it up, there's a huge audience for that. If I'm 50 miles outside of Boise, Idaho, I could be in some of the most beautiful country there is. But there might be one accountant for every 4 zip codes. In that case, it's very much a buyer's marketplace. I was doing a workshop, a succession workshop for the AICPA, and someone in the Midwest said to me, I'd never buy someone's practice. There's only 2 of us in the entire county. If they've ever left, I'm the only place for them to go. What's changed the most in the last few years are the larger firms. It's become very much more of a buyer's marketplace, and it's becoming more and more every year for the larger firm. Look at a city like Boston. Boston has over 40 firms in the greater Boston area that are doing between 3 and 8 million. And there's only a handful, on one hand, the amount of local firms large enough to be their successor. So what you're really looking at in that situation is, if there's 45 firms between 3 and 8 million, I doubt 15 of them have the talent on the bench to execute a long-term succession plan. A lot of these firms are going to fight to get the young talent, and the losers are going to have to merge up. And it's already become a buyer's marketplace in many of those areas for that. Now, of course, one of the biggest issues that we face when we're talking about doing a deal before tax season are integration issues. And integration issues are very real, and they're very strong. A lot of them are IT related. You know, getting onto the same software, having the same performance for the tax returns. Getting our cultures to blend when we're at our craziest point in time. Very challenging. These are always issues, by the way, regardless of the time of year. It's just because of the pace, because of the obligations that we have to get work done, it makes integration more challenging. There's no doubt about it. You know, you're always going to have an issue with compensation discrepancies. What I mean by that is we merge together. If my senior's getting paid $100,000, your senior's getting paid $75,000, they're going to figure it out eventually. They might. You don't want them figuring out in the middle of tax season and having issues that are going to prevent you from being a smooth operating ship to get through the busy season. Our client service differences. One of the goals we should have is that we're going to end up having one team doing all the administration, right? So how are we going to do that in the middle of tax season? And of course, everybody sits there and says, I'm nuts this time of year. How am I going to do any of this? Well, there are certain things to think about that will help you mitigate some of these or work around some of these issues. So let's look at the three main options of affiliating before tax season. The first one is, hey, let's close the deal and integrate right away. I still have closings scheduled over the next week to 2 weeks that still plan on integrating, getting everything done, and being one firm for tax season. Now, obviously, those are firms that have capacity, that have flexibility. Some of them just got lucky that we use the same software, so we didn't have to worry about that aspect of the integration process. All right. Some of them are because I have a firm, for example, that's merging with a larger firm, and the larger firm really does a huge amount of nonprofit and a huge amount of litigation support and very little tax work. But they wanted to diversify. They're bringing in a tax firm, but they have nothing but capacity this time of year. This isn't their busy season. I have a firm that does all school districts, no 1040s. They have no tax season. They are slower now than they were in October. So it changes for certain firms, so some firms can get away with it. There are also many firms that are closing their deals in January and even February, not instituting any changes, though, operating as if they're two firms internally, but externally holding it out to the world as a merger. So you use Lacert, I use CCH. Your team will continue to use Lacert. We're going to use CCH. You're going to still handle your billing. I'm still going to handle my billing. But the reason that some people will still do the deal now and integrate later is so that we can still take advantage of tax season in many ways, from transitioning to financially, to backup and support, to cross-selling opportunities that arise when you get to physically sit with your client. So the first way, we close a deal and integrate, and it's effective right away. The second deal is we close the deal, we don't integrate. We still operate in ways that are, in many ways, are two separate firms until after tax season. But at least we start the transition, and we could give each other some backup and support during the busiest time of year. And the third way is, for example, we have a closing in the Philadelphia office next week, that they're closing next week, but the deal's not effective till June 1st. So these are three very different ways to get your deal done this time of year, that the terms, not so much the terms of the financial terms of the deal, but the nature of the practices will tell you which of these three options are the most realistic for you to get to. But there's different reasons why we would do a deal now, effective later, or effective now. And before we do those, let's get our third polling question to make sure all of you will get your CPE. This is our third, second to last one.
Okay, the third polling question's on the screen. This one is, how many more tax seasons do you envision yourself working full-time? Options right there ahead of you, 1 to 3, 4 to 6, greater than 6, or until you die at your desk. All right, this is a pretty quick one to answer, so we'll give everyone just a couple more seconds. And as Joel mentioned, it's the second to last, and you do need to do 3 out of the 4 to get your CPE today. Okay, I'll go ahead and close the poll. The results are there on the screen. The most popular answer was greater than 6 at 35%. Then 25% say until they die at their desk, another 25% in that 1 to 3 range. And then 14% say 4 to 6 years.
Okay. Well, I will say this for most people. I usually look at a 5-year window. And what I mean by that is we go back to 1 year is 1 visit, 3 years is 3 visits, 5 years is 5 visits. If I'm 6 years or longer from slowing down, not retiring, slowing down, then I don't need to worry that minute about my succession plan. If I'm looking at a merger, obviously it's irrelevant. Maybe I'm looking at a merger to have backup support, growth, a bigger platform of services with a long-term eye on succession. But if I'm 5 years or less from slowing down, it's probably time to start thinking about a transition plan and using those tax seasons I have left to get something done. But if I'm merging up or I'm selling, why would I want to do a deal right before tax season? Well, our main reasons are the following. The first one's backup. If there's one time of year I am the most vulnerable to losing a staff or a partner temporarily to a health issue, nobody twists their ankle in November. Everybody twists their ankle in March. Crises never seem to hit in December and after October 15th. They hit me March 1st. They hit me March 13th. So if I have done any of those 3 deals, a deal that's effective right now when we integrate, a deal that obviously in that case someone's going to be there to help me get past and give me this backup and support. If I'm doing a deal and not integrating and it's effective now, I'm going to have that backup and support. But believe it or not, in many of the deals that we are closing now that aren't effective till June, we have language in there. There's a deal we're doing in New York right now where they could not integrate. They couldn't make it happen. We're not going to get this deal done to the beginning of February. But the smaller firm already said to the successor firm, hey, one of my staff people, I'm probably looking at a loss soon. They have a health issue. It's getting worse, and we're anticipating losing. The successor firm said, look, I'm going to be doing a deal with you. I've got to help protect that asset. I will give you the staff to help get you through this busy season. They're not going to give it to them for free. They're going to give it to them for their cost. But they had the capacity to do this, or they wouldn't have had the capacity to do the deal to begin with anyway. So obviously, if I'm about to take on $1 million, in this case, a $900,000 practice in June, I must have some capacity. So I have the capacity to help get them through busy season. For many people who are looking to slow down or what have you, it's kind of like a built-in practice continuation agreement. Because if I close my deal February 1st, effective June 1st, there's usually language that if I get hit by the bus, the effective date gets accelerated. So I have backup and support for if I have a temporary issue, but I also have backup and support if I have a more significant issue. But of course, one of the biggest reasons that I want to use tax season is because I don't want to lose an entire year. If I want to slow down in 3 years, that's only 3 visits. If I lose this tax season, that only gives me 2 visits. 2 visits before I slow down. That might force me into having to work for an additional year more than I wanted to. It also promotes continuity to get a deal done now. Because what happens is the clients come in, they still see the same faces, they still see everything, their fee structure is the same, but they're meeting more people. And we'll talk a little bit in a few minutes about keys to retaining clients and utilizing this tax season. And of course, another reason to close a deal sooner than later is there's a history that shows values are coming down. I don't want to put off my deal, not start negotiating till November and December, because there's a good chance I'm going to get more in January because of the marketplace than I'm going to get. Certainly I'm going to get more in 2016, generally speaking, than I'm likely going to get in 2019. If I'm the successor firm, there's also reasons I look to get a deal done now. Again, client contact. Even if my deal is with you now and not effective till June, when your 4 or 5 biggest clients come in, I want to be there. I want to do that introduction. I want to be part of the process. I want to protect that asset of mine. One of the reasons that this $900,000 deal in New York is going to happen in the next week or two weeks from now, even though it's not effective till June, yes, the seller needed backup and support. But the buyer also wanted to protect that firm. If they didn't have the backup and support, there may not be a $900,000 practice. Maybe it's a $700,000. The buyer's protecting their own asset. They're going to be the successor. Again, there's continuity. If I'm able to close the deal and have it effective before busy season, obviously from a cash flow perspective, as the successor firm, that should wildly interest me. If it's a tax season-oriented acquisition or merger, of course. And the last thing is I want to lock up that deal. In many marketplaces, there's competition to acquire or merge in a firm. I want to lock that in now so that they don't come up to an opportunity where they meet somebody else later that says, oh, I would have even done better than that. I want to lock my deal. That's a very important rationale for some people. Now, if I can't get the deal done in time, and we're not even going to be able to close and have it effective until after tax season, hey, I get that. All right, we're halfway through January. That's going to happen more often than getting the deal done before if we haven't even started the process. Let me give you some things to think about regarding that. If I'm the potential successor firm, I should never use tax season as the excuse for why I need to put this deal on hold, unless I'm referring more to integration issues than capacity issues. In the Midwest, in Florida, I very recently had a situation. It was a small firm doing about $750,000, merging into a $3 million firm. They're going to work full-time for 3 years and then have a buyout. It's something we call a two-stage deal. And the buyer said to them in the beginning of December, you know what, maybe we shouldn't get this thing done and keep the pedal to the metal because we're coming into such a busy season. Seller smiled and agreed, left the meeting, called me when they got back to the office and said, that firm's out. I said, why is that firm out? He said, look, they don't really get their busy season going until February. I don't get mine going until February. We had 2.5 months to get this done, and he's already worried about capacity. If he's that worried about capacity, how's he going to handle another $750,000 in billings? The message they sent was that they're so bloody busy now they can't think about doing it. That's a pretty bad message to send to someone who's counting on you for backup support, and especially if there's a succession involved. If I'm the mergee or the seller, I could get away with it. I could say, I'm so bloody busy now. I get it. That's maybe why I want to merge up, or maybe part of the reason I'm looking to sell. But if I'm the successor firm, be careful. I've also had a lot of situations where firms said to me, I want to get in there now and make them love me now, so that May 1st comes along, they don't keep shopping. They come right back to me, and we get our deal done. There's also firms, as I gave examples before, that aren't really that greatly impacted by tax season, including larger firms. How many larger firms, for example, is the managing partner doing someone's 1040? They're there, but they're not all nuts. So some partners, by their role, actually in many of my larger firms, the partners are less busy during busy season. They're there, they're monitoring, they're managing, but they actually do less. They're less busy then because their main focus is new business development, M&A, and different things, right? Also, what tax season is the worst for you? Is it March 15th? Is it April 15th? We actually get an increase in our activity after March 15th from certain firms that aren't very 1040 oriented, but very business oriented, and they start focusing back in the M&A right after that. These are important things to know. See, the issue of putting something off during busy season is usually an issue of time, and I get that. We're already burning the candle at both ends to get it done. But if I go and I meet with you in January and February, we can't get it done. It doesn't mean I still shouldn't reach out to you during busy season. Maybe eat a lunch together. I want to send the signal I'm still interested. I want to send the signal I still have capacity. And it's not crazy time. So we meet for lunch for an hour twice during busy season. I'm cementing the relationship. I'm giving everybody a chance to vent. I'm showing my interest. Very good things to do. So even if you can't get your deal done at all, be careful that you're not sending the wrong message if you're the successor firm. And keep these types of things in mind. Now, no matter when you're doing the deal, it's always critically important to remember the 4 C's. The 4 C's are: start with chemistry. If you don't want to eat lunch with someone, it doesn't matter what time of year it is, don't do a deal with them. This is important on many levels. Number one, if I'm going to be working with you for years, that's critical. Number two, why do I have my clients again? Why do I have my staff again? They're comfortable with the way we operate. Why would I merge with you if I'm not comfortable with you? Why would I think my clients and staff would be? So the most important thing is always chemistry. The next thing is continuity. Most accounting firm clients have a plethora of firms to choose from. They chose your firm. They chose your firm based on their comfort level, the fee structure, the location, many different things. If the successor firm is going to have to make significant changes that impact that continuity, that's a reason not to do a deal. Now think of change in 2 ways. Let's call it change in front of the door and change behind the door. Change behind the door might be you use Lacert, I use CCH. None of your clients care. That's not a problem. Change in front of the door is I personally went out to see my clients as a partner. They're going to have a junior stop by twice a year and expect everything to be emailed in. That's a real issue. That's a change in front of the door. So when you're focusing on continuity, what we need to focus on is, are the changes going to be looked as a benefit or as a loss? This brings us to part of the continuity and change factor is the culture. If I asked 10 of you on the phone, let alone over the 100 plus that are here, and said, define 2 things about culture, I'll end up with 30, 40, 50 things about culture. I've heard dress code. I've heard fee structure. I've heard we're a one firm client. That's a big culture. Hard to match that culture with an eat what you kill culture. Hard to match a value billing firm with a retainer billing type of firm or fixed fee firm. So certain cultures are very challenging to mix. They have a negative impact on continuity and just generally speaking. So this is the 3rd C, and there's no order. All 4 of these are critical. All right? Maybe chemistry might be my number 1. The rest are all 1A. And the last C that I don't think enough people think about is capacity. Part of capacity is certainly skill set, but do we have the capacity and skill set to replace the people that are leaving? If I'm merging in a 3-partner firm and all 3 of them are slowing down over the next 6 years and they're all putting in 2,000 hours and they're all putting in 1,500 chargeable, am I going to be able to create 4,500 chargeable hours on a partner level? Can I create enough leverage that I can overcome that? So these 4 C's are so important: chemistry, continuity, culture, and capacity. And remember, a good deal is a fair deal. The seller needs to be paid and the mergee for their years of sweat equity, but nobody does a deal to lose money. There has to be meat left on the bone. That's why when you're doing your deal, don't just go right to the multiple account. It's a package. You got to put it all on the table. This way, if someone wants to increase one thing, we know we have to decrease something else. And one of the things that makes a firm more attractive than ever right now is good young staff. If you have really great staff, that just helped your practice become more attractive. Now, we're going to end today's session by the keys to retaining clients. And the keys to retaining clients are knowing the 4 fears that most clients have. The first one is the person I trust, which most of the time is a partner or an owner. Sometimes it could be a critical staff member. Are they still there? Second one, is this going to cost me more money? Third one is, now do I have to travel far and drive through all that traffic to get to see my accountant if I go visit them? And for some firms, staff is critically important. Are they going to be there? So you need to understand these 4 objections so that you could make a plan to overcome them before they're brought up. So let's take an example. Let's say I'm merging in with Nikki, And I'm going to take my practice and I'm going to break up the clients into categories: doctors, retail, 1040 only, wholesale, nonprofit, etc. And I'm going to create a message that I'm going to send to them all. So let's use the example of an announcement letter. So let's say that I'm going to merge with Nikki, and this letter is going to doctors that I serve. I'll probably start my letter in the following way. Hey, I'm pleased, by the way, even if it's a sale, I'm going to hold it out as a merger. Dr. Jones, I'm pleased to announce that I merged my practice with Nikki. Nikki's an expert in the Obama tax laws and the modern computerization of accounting, especially as it relates to the medical community. Having her on board will enable us to offer you additional services, yet maintain the same fee structure. I will be remaining the principal in charge of you as a client. The staff that you're used to working with are part of our new combined dedicated team of professionals, and I remain geographically sensitively located here in Palm Beach County, Florida. So in the first paragraph, I overcame all 4 objections. I'm still here, the fee's the same, the staff's still here, and we're still in the same area. This is why the greater the loyalty between an accounting firm client and its owners, the easier it is to retain all the clients, because you can take advantage of that loyalty in a moral and ethical way instead of fearing it. The key is we have to make this the gain of the successor firm, never the loss of the original firm. All right? This is what we have to avoid. Change scares people. It's a dirty word. So avoid it. And I use the announcement letter as an example. I wouldn't send an announcement letter to my biggest client. By the way, nor would I go there alone. In 1990, I had someone go, one of my very first deals, went to their biggest client and said, listen, I got great news. I just merged with John. Great in construction. That's what you do. And I'm blah, blah, blah. And at the end of the meeting, the client said, Murray, that's great, but you're the guy I deal with. If he would have brought John with him, the client wouldn't have said, John, nice to meet you. Never want to see you again. So you need to plan who gets a letter, who gets a phone call, who gets a visit. And tax season actually has implications here. Let's say I closed the deal in June. I probably won't send an announcement letter to my 1040 only clients in June and give them a year to think about it. I'll probably wait for them till I send them the tax organizer in January and include my announcement letter then. Why give them that much time to think about it? So again, even tax season has some ramifications in transition, not just from visiting them, but in closing a deal just after tax season. If there's going to be a long period of time before I service somebody or need to speak to somebody, do I want to let them know day one, or do I want to buy some time? So we tried to discuss varying things in this hour to walk you through it. If you're members of the AICPA, on your screen you'll see a succession planning resource center that they have. If you're a PCPS member especially, you're going to see a voluminous amount of information there that will help you in a whole bunch of different things. Happen to be a big fan of the PCPS. They really do care about their client base. Also on our website, especially under the resource section, there's probably 60 plus articles that my partner Terry and I have written on valuing firms, structuring deals, transitioning clients, what to look for in due diligence, internal succession readiness assessments, partnership agreements. Feel free and comfortable. There's all sorts of these types of white papers, etc., available for you. You don't have to register or anything, so they're all there. So I hope everybody got value out of today's session. Let's make sure you get your CP and get you your last polling question. Nikki?
Okay, here's the 4th and final polling question for today, and this is, which is the biggest deadline for you? Is it March 15th, April 15th, September 15th, or October 15th? While you're finishing that up, just a reminder that if you did register through Transition Advisors, you'll get an email from me here shortly. You can click on the link to that online survey. And once you've done that, along with the polling questions, you'll get your CPE certificate within the next week or so, certainly within 10 business days. Okay, just one more second, then I'll close the poll. The results are there on the screen. It looks like the majority of folks are April 15th with a pretty even split between the other 3.
Okay.
All right. Well, Joel, thank you so much for today's presentation. Everyone, thank you so much for attending. Look for that email this afternoon and let us know if you have any follow-up questions.
Thank you, Nikki. Everybody have a great day and good luck getting through the busy season, everyone.